Do you know what I am? I'm a fighter, I'm a warrior, I'm a campaigner. I stand up against big institutions when they behave badly, whether they're banks or out-of-touch bureaucracies based in Brussels. And very often, I win.
Nigel Farage.
I'm Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK. Just before we came on air, we overtook the Conservatives in the national opinion polls. We are now the opposition to Labour.
I hear Nigel Farage talking a lot about dependence.
Facts.
The problem that we have in higher education now is that changes in visa requirements means that family members aren't able to come and study to accompany students to Welsh universities. That is causing major problems in terms of revenue for our higher education.
You shouldn't bring your mum. You come to university in Britain, you can't bring your mum, can you? I mean, come on.
We need people to come to study in our universities.
Congratulations, Nigel Farage. If the polls are to be believed, and they might not be, you're going to play your part in wiping out the Tory party, producing the greatest Labour majority in history, a political earthquake in Britain. Does that give you pleasure?
OK. That map was produced by Savanta Polling, OK? Their survey work, their field work, began on the 4th of June.
Early.
Very early, before, their field work began before I declared I was in the race.
Oh, so you could do better than that?
Let me bring you up to date. Fully up to date, OK? We're filming this today. Last night at 5 o'clock, 2 separate companies came out with polls. And they're all playing catch-up now. They all recognise something is happening out there. Yeah. On one poll last night, we were tied with the Conservatives on 19%. On a second poll that came out last night, we were leading the Conservatives 19 to 18. So that map suddenly looks very different. Well, it looks even...
It's still, whatever happens, is a Tory wipeout. Now, what I really want our viewers to know is that is your objective. You are happy if the country turns red and we get a huge Labour majority.
What last night's polls show is we're going to win seats. A good number of seats, but it could become a very substantial number of seats. And very important that people recognise this. Even if I had not thrown myself into this campaign, the Conservatives were doomed anyway. A very large chunk of their 2019 vote feel literally betrayed by the party. And what I'm saying is this. Starmer's going to win, and we all know that now. It's just a matter of, by what margin. Who is going to be the voice of opposition to a Labour government with a big majority? A split, divided Conservative Party or me? And I'm saying it's going to be me.
You're saying more than that, aren't you? I was intrigued when your manifesto, you call it a contract, came out. There is Nigel Farage standing in front of 10 Downing Street. What you're saying to people is I'm no longer that chat show host. I'm no longer that guy running for Parliament expects to lose again. I want to be your Prime Minister. Is your aim to do what your friend Donald Trump's done in the United States? There he is. To take over the right of British politics and then to take power?
Well, there isn't a right of British politics. It's gone. It's disappeared. I mean, we've had 14 years of Conservative government. They may as well change their name to the SDP. It's been high tax, big state, more control of our lives, a damaging period for the 5.5 million men and women running small businesses. They've not even been vaguely conservative, low tax, free market. And on the big one, and the big one is immigration. When you think that since the Conservatives came to power, our population has risen by 6 million. And you wonder why you can't get a GP appointment. You wonder why the roads are clogged. You wonder why you can't get a house.
Nigel Farage.
Well, Dennis, the NHS has 2 fundamental problems. One, Penny mentioned, caseloads up by 43%. Why? Because we have an exploding population. All of our public services are under pressure because the population has increased by 6 million since the Conservatives came to power. It's impossible to keep up. Secondly, everyone talks about more money, more money. We've massively increased the amount we spend on the NHS. We've gone from spending about 7% of the national cake to over 11% of the national cake for worse and worse returns. And we need to look at countries like France, who spend exactly the same sum of money, but get far better services by people paying in to an insurance fund. It acts on a mutual basis. Those that can't pay don't. They get better results. Let's think more broadly.
Thank you.
The elephant in the room
is the fact that it's not migration is the problem, it's the fact that we need more people coming in to work in our hospitals and to work in our social care
Thank you very much indeed.
Very well.
We have to spend money wisely. Just pump. Folks, I've explained to you, we've massively increased over the last few years the percentage of the national cake we put into the NHS for a worse return. Does nobody else acknowledge we need to spend the money better?
Of course we do. That's
for life.
Nigel Farage.
Scotland was world class at one point. It certainly isn't now. It's gone right down the international rankings. Look, there is a problem. We know the buildings, the rat concrete, all of that, but we are back to the subject that nobody wants to discuss. The exploding population means our schools, our class sizes are getting bigger. Of course, we've recruited more teachers. We need more teachers with an exploding population. And it's a constant problem that none of the other panellists even want to discuss.
Angela Rayner, tell Nigel Farage about the policy that you have on finding new teachers.
Well, first of all, I respectfully disagree that we have the exploding population in our schools. We have falling roles in our schools at the moment, actually, and that is a problem for many of our primary schools. But what
Nigel Farage and then Penny Mordaunt.
Look, you know, if you put 20% on private school fees, all you'll finish up with a lot more, probably 25% of those currently in private school will then be a burden for state schools. It is a self-defeating policy that removes parental choice.
OK.
Well, Nigel, those schools could...
OK, thank you.
Our state schools have had austerity and have cuts and cuts. Those schools could absorb some of those costs so they didn't have to pass it on to all of the people that
you're happy with more pupils going into the state sector?
But we cannot afford to give private schools a tax break when our state system cannot have the right teachers in the classrooms that they deserve.
OK, must bring in Penny Mordaunt now.
Under the Conservatives, they've got to...
Unlike the other six, I don't need an altar queue. I'm here because I believe in what I believe in. Our politics isn't working. You've heard these pathetic arguments tonight between the two big parties. Really, there isn't much difference. But electorally, Labour are going to win. The debate is who forms the opposition in the next Parliament? Who fights for the rights of ordinary British people? Who fights to control our borders? Who fights for men and women running small businesses? Reform UK is about to become a political phenomenon, an historic one. So I urge you, join the revolt.
You want to be Prime Minister. That's what you want to be. And this is... Europe is at war. Now, when the war happened, the big war, when Vladimir Putin sent his troops across the border in 22, you blamed the West, not him. You said, I'll just read it to you and then you can react, that on a tweet, it was a consequence of EU and NATO expansion. Is that a judgment you stand by?
Right. I'll tell you what, you don't know. I stood up in the European Parliament in 2014 and I said, and I quote, there will be a war in Ukraine. Why did I say that? It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
But you were echoing him.
I was... Sorry?
You were echoing him. That's what Putin says.
No. Sorry, I've been saying this actually since the 1990s. Ever since the fall of the wall. But hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what we've done as an excuse.
But we provoked the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen. And of course, everyone said I was a pariah for daring to suggest it. George Robertson, former Labour cabinet minister, who went on to become the Secretary-General of NATO, has in the last couple of weeks said the war is a direct result of EU expansion.
But I'm asking you about, because it's your judgment, you want to be Prime Minister. Let me ask you about someone else.
My judgment has been way ahead of everybody else's in understanding this.
I want to ask you about another leader that you've said you've admired. Let's take a look at Liz Truss, another leader that you say you've admired. Millions of people remember the mini budget. You're laughing, but you said on the day of the mini budget, Twitter's very helpful. Today, you said, was the best Conservative budget since the 1980s. Is that the judgment of someone who deserves to be Prime Minister?
Well, she wanted to get rid of IR35 rules, which are damaging the self-employed. She wanted to change corporation tax back to a more sensible level. There were a lot of things here that were pro-growth and pro-business. The one big mistake she made, she didn't have any cuts in spending. Interestingly, though...
But she was on the right track, Liz Truss.
What was interesting about that was the day before the budget, the Bank of England raised interest rates 0.5%. So some of the thinking was right, the delivery was wrong, the timing was appalling.
Let's turn to the biggest judgment you probably made in your career. You know, if you were knocked down by the number 10 bus.
Which has happened before.
On the way out of the BBC, no doubt on your tombstone, it would say the man who brought us Brexit, wouldn't it? It's a failure, though.
No, it's not a failure, but we failed to deliver. It can't be a failure. We've left the European Union. We're now self-governing. The question is then, what do you do with it?
And what's your words? Brexit has failed, you said.
Well, that's half, again, it's half the sentence. Brexit has failed. Those who voted for it believing that immigration numbers would be reduced.
No, Brexit failed, and you went on Newsnight last year. We haven't benefited from Brexit economically. Now, I promise you, we're going to come to immigration. Let's talk about the economy. It has failed, in your words, economically.
Our overseas trade has changed, and it's quite good in many ways. Our overseas trade has changed in that we're now doing more business with the rest of the world than we've ever done before. And we've actually gone, since the Brexit vote, from being the world's 7th biggest exporter to the world's 4th biggest exporter. That side of things is fine.
Just pause a second. It's interesting, that stat, because you've used it a lot.
Yeah.
So I looked into it.
Yeah.
Or is the trade in exports, is trade up or down in goods?
No, it's services that we're booming in.
Yeah, exactly.
So
trade in goods, the things you told people in those left-behind towns.
Well, do you know why?
That's down, not up, isn't it?
Well, do you know
What's up? Trade in gold and trade in financial services.
Our net zero policies have deindustrialised Britain. And that's one of the reasons why we're not exporting goods, we're manufacturing less. And that's a separate debate, but something I feel very strongly about.
Yeah, we'll come to that too.
Where the economics has failed is, and I'm back to that 5.5 million. You see, I'm old-fashioned. I believe that growth doesn't come from half a dozen big multinationals that virtually own our political parties in terms of their thinking. It comes from the actions, the simultaneous actions of millions of people taking risk.
But the only trade up, Mr. Farage, is in financial services, which is okay for city boys like you. That's where you made your money.
Well, financial services.
The financial services. But it's not so good for the people who wanted to leave the EU to be better off. They're not better off.
Financial services are in Bristol, they're in Cardiff, they're in Birmingham, they're in Manchester, insurance companies, etc. Financial services, the city is quite a small part of financial services in terms of jobs. My point is this: there were two realistic expectations from Brexit. One, we control our borders and reduce the numbers coming in. They've exploded, they've trebled to numbers you can't even believe. And secondly, and that's because of a Conservative government that didn't even try, because their big backers want cheap foreign labour.
Stick with the economy for the moment.
And secondly, it was a realistic expectation. Indeed, when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, he was going to scrap 4,000 EU laws. He then binned that policy. So we've not seen the simplification of regulation.
Yeah, I hear you.
If you put me in charge, it'd be very, very different. Okay, but of course they didn't do that, did they?
Let's imagine you in charge.
And the Conservative Party never believed in Brexit. They never believed in it. They picked it up as a political opportunity and they failed to deliver. Deregulation and immigration were the gains that we could have had. We haven't had them because of the Conservative Party.
Well, let's talk about what you could do going forwards. You've said that you want to have no net migration, and you said you could do it on day one if you're in power, not gradually, on day one. Now, let's be clear what no net migration really means.
Yes.
It means that people only move here if other people have moved out, have left the country. Effectively, one in, one out, if you're going to have no net zero. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, it's not as simplistic as that, but yes. I mean, all the time, people are leaving all the time. People are coming all the time. What we do know is that there's an argument that says we need more and more immigration because there are labour shortages. All right? That's one argument that gets put. I've got cases now of nurses who've been through university, who've been denied jobs in British hospitals because the NHS, with government support, have been employing foreign nurses and British ones qualified with big debt aren't being employed.
Well, that brings us to the detail, doesn't it? Which is, you say one in, one out. Let me just answer the question.
Here's the biggest detail.
Let me answer the question, right? Yeah, because you'll have a chance.
Yeah.
In this contract, it says that you'll make exceptions. You'll make exceptions for essential skills, particularly around healthcare. So, does that mean, just quickly, as time is short, nurses, they can come into the country?
Well, not until we employ the British ones. And for the British government to have been paying £1,000 per nurse for health trusts to employ foreign nurses. I mean, can you believe the scandal of what's been going on here?
Let's go through paramedics, midwives, pharmacists, carers for the elderly. They can all come in.
We should Of course they can come in, but here's the point.
That gets you to 328,000 last year.
No.
In terms of health visas.
And here's the point. Of all the work visas we've given out in the last 2 years, the record 2 years, 50% of the total numbers have been dependents. Okay? So, yes, people come to work, but they're bringing dependents with them. And here is the big pitch of why this should be the immigration election. A 10 million increase in our population since Mr. Blair came to power. A 6 million increase since the Tories came to power. 85% of that directly down to government policy on legal, not illegal, but legal
Why
migration.
I'm trying to find out what you do, rather than what you'd say.
There is a population crisis.
Yeah.
What Boris Johnson and the Tories did,
yeah.
they lowered the levels, they lowered the skill levels.
What are you going to do? What I was asking you is how your system works. 1 in, 1 out is the effective thing.
Yeah.
People can only come if other people have already gone. So does that mean that if a company wants to employ computer programmers, we don't have enough of them? If they want a software developer, we don't have enough of those. What about an architect? What about those carers? Does some new body working for Nigel Farage say, look, sorry, mate, no visa for you until Bob gets his dream home in Spain?
If you get a job with CNN...
What's the answer?
Right, hang on. If you get a job with CNN, you will get a 1 or 2 year work permit. You'll go to New York. You'll work for CNN. If you overstay your work permit by 1 day, they will smash your door down, put you in handcuffs and deport you from the country, all right? We have been completely confusing work visas with permanent right to stay and with bringing your own family.
Is that what should happen here?
Do you know something? A work permit should be a work permit, should be a work permit.
Doors should be smashed down, people should be arrested and deported. You raised it.
I'm talking figuratively. In America, they would do that.
Okay.
We wouldn't quite do that here.
Just not sure I know how this system works.
Can you believe?
I know what you're cross about, but I don't know how your system works.
Well, I'll give you an example. Students, overseas students, have brought with them 125,000 dependents.
Not their mums. You said on the television the other day, their mums.
Yeah, bring your mum.
No, it's not true, Mr. Farage.
It is true.
You cannot bring your mother. You've never been able to bring your
bring
mother.
Who you like
and the rules have just been changed so you can't bring your dependent.
We are so lax.
This is simply not true.
We are so lax in this country, you can do what you like.
Nigel Farage, it's not true what you're saying.
Well, it is. But anyway.
You can bring your mum. You're saying it's true?
Yeah, pretty much,
on our public services. So I welcome immigration in this country because they contribute to our public service. But the numbers are due to come down anyway. But I think part of the reason we have so many people coming here, and I welcome them when they do, is because we're not investing in our domestic workforce, and we can do both at the same time.
OK, thank you. There was some pretty strong language used towards Nigel Farage about dog whistle tours and scapegoat politics. What's your response to that,
I'm just
Nigel
talking
Farage?
numbers. We haven't even mentioned housing yet.
But could you respond to that point in particular?
No, I ignore that nonsense. Complete nonsense. I'm just talking pure facts. Housing. We have to build 1 new home every 2 minutes just to cope with legal net migration under this Conservative government. It is literally impossible. And as for the numbers coming in, I would respond to this. 50% of the 750,000 who are coming in a year are dependents. They're not wealth creators. And mass migration is making us poorer. You'll hear, GDP's going up. Well, of course it is. There are more people. GDP per capita, our relative wealth, has declined for the last 6 consecutive quarters.
I hear Nigel talking a lot about... I hear Nigel Farage talking a lot about dependence.
Facts.
The problem that we have in higher education now is that changes in visa requirements means that family members aren't able to come and study to accompany students to Welsh universities. That is causing major problems in terms of revenue for our higher education.
You shouldn't bring your mum. You come to university in Britain, you can't bring your mum, can you? I mean, come on.
We need people to come to study in our universities.
Thank you. We're relying on people from abroad to care for our loved ones. They should be able to bring their loved ones with them.
OK, thank you. I just want to turn to Angela Rayner, who's quite quiet here. You did raise your hand alongside Nigel Farage on that question. Angela Rayner.
Yeah, because the Tories, they talk...
Indeed, Angela Rayner. Nigel Farage.
Well, it's funny Angela Rayner says that because Labour today launched their 6 key priorities for the general election and didn't mention the single most important issue affecting the lives of everybody in this country, namely the population explosion caused directly by migration. The reason we voted Brexit and the reason Penny's party got the massive majority in 2019 is we voted to reduce the numbers coming in and the numbers have exploded. Honestly, unbelievable. 1 in 30 people walking on the street out there has come in the last 2 years alone. The answer is we have to have net migration at zero. It means skilled workers can come, we can go and work abroad. We have to have a freeze on the total numbers of those coming in.
Well, let's turn to the NHS.
Got to ask yourself a question. What is the NHS for, right? And the original concept, and the one we should defend totally now, is that it's free at the point of delivery. The argument that I'm making, and by the way, very interesting, Professor Carol Sikora, global cancer expert,
agrees with you.
has said, look, Nigel's thinking is right. The question is, how do we get there? And everybody would say to you that the French have a mutual system where if you, out of your income, some of your money goes towards an insurance policy, effectively. And if you haven't got the money, you don't pay. And
let me be clear with viewers who don't know.
And those firms...
You pay the doctor and then you claim the money back. So you do take your wallet to the doctors because you pay and then your insurance gives you back. It's a big change. I'm just asking you whether you want to do it.
Well, it costs you nothing to go to the doctor, right? Because you get it back. And the reason they do that, and by the way, British GPs have this problem, is people book appointments and don't turn up.
Okay.
All right? So actually, think about it, it makes sense.
Okay, understood. It's quite a big change.
There are a lot of people in this country living on benefits who don't want to be on benefits.
I'm asking you where you get 140
I'm just about to explain to you.
That is massively
Well, let me explain.
The party.
The biggest expenditure is raising the threshold to 20,000. That means if you're on benefits now and you go to work and work more than 16 hours a week, you're worse off.
I still don't know where the money's coming from.
Well, number one, we will get people off the unemployment register
That's
into
not going to raise you £140 billion a year, so I can tell you. You were on I'm a Celebrity. You should have been on Fantasy Island.
I get out of it.
These figures are nonsense, and you know they're nonsense.
I tell you what is nonsense, real nonsense. The Labour and Conservative net zero policies. And why are we not debating it?
Well, we are. Because
No. You won't debate it with them. They won't debate it with you. And this is the remarkable thing about this election, is how few differences there are between Labour and Conservative. They are both committed to decarbonising the grid. The estimated cost, listen to this, the estimated cost is between 2 and 3 trillion. It's a ridiculous number. We're quite confident we can save over 30 billion a year just by getting rid of this ludicrous commitment and going for a longer-term plan of nuclear energy, which is carbon-free.
That's why I want to ask you what underlies this, if I may, on climate change.
Yeah.
Because you're making a big promise. You're saying we're going to scrap the net zero programme.
It's mad.
Is your message to people watching this now, many of whom are very worried about climate change, hugely worried about it, is your essential message crisis? What crisis?
No, I mean, I do think ever since the late 1980s that perhaps there's been a bit of hype around this, and I think, that perhaps is wrong. Now, what have we got people, spraying Stonehenge with orange powder? Because all we ever talk about is fear rather than solutions.
So is David Attenborough wrong and Nigel Farage is right?
No. I'm not arguing the science. I'm arguing what
you are.
I am not arguing the science.
Well, if you say it's not really a crisis and we don't really need to do anything about it.
No. I didn't say that. I said we spend too much time hyperventilating about the problem rather than thinking practically and logically what we can do.
Penarth in South Wales.
Good evening. Britain is a rich country. I've worked in housing for 32 years. Why am I working every day with individuals and families who never thought they'd struggle, but now rely on food banks and are at serious risk of homelessness?
Thank you very much indeed, Janice. Nigel Farage.
Because people are getting poorer. It's quite simple. I mentioned a few moments ago that GDP, wealth per capita, has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters. And it's very much, and it's been the same, it sort of began with Labour, but it's continued. It's very much a country in which the big corporates and the big banks and a certain group of people have become richer exponentially, and everybody else has fallen behind. And things that perhaps, we could have expected when we were younger, our kids and grandkids now find a house unaffordable. Rents have risen by 20%, in some parts 30%, just in the last 3 years. And I'm sorry, but we are back to the population explosion and the massive impact it's having on the lives of people. And we've got to try to get the population to steady, and we have to build more houses, and we have to take the poorer people out of tax. Increase the tax
Thank you very much.
to £20,000, get people back to work.
Thank you very much. You've had your time. Nigel Farage, thank you for that. Really.
There is the ambition from either of the Westminster main parties to invest in allowing us in Wales to make the most of our natural resources through devolving the Crown Estate, allowing us to invest in transport and connectivity through giving us the billions we're owed as a result of HS2 rail in England. That's the ambition that we need. We're not hearing it from the Conservatives, and I regret we're not hearing it from
Nigel
We need to do something with vision. And if we increase the level at which people start to pay tax to £20,000, that takes 7 million people out of tax. That's up to a £1,500 benefit for people on lower wages. But it helps get people off the benefits trap. Because the benefits trap is if you start to go back to work and earn money, you lose benefits. Plus, we'd rely less on unskilled foreign labour. That's the kind of vision that we need to help those who are at the lower end of the income scale or on benefits in this country. Do you know what? I really believe it would work.
Just a quick question, Nigel Farage, from Suella Braverman actually has talked about the two-child benefit cap, which has been raised, just touched on a couple of times. I know that at some point we'll return to that. Suella Braverman has actually said that two-child benefit cap should be lifted. She's spoken quite warmly about you in recent times.
I know.
Well, I wasn't asking you to respond to that necessarily, Nigel Farage, but she would welcome a lifting of that cap. Would you agree with Suella?
I think we should encourage people to have families. I think we should encourage people to have children.
So is that, so they should all be... all of those children...
And I think we should also encourage people in marriage to have some tax benefits as well. I really do.
So that's a yes? Yeah. A lifting of the two-child...
Yeah, we've got to help people.
OK, Angela Rayner, would you...
Right. Listen. We've deindustrialised. Our steel works close. Where do they go? India. The same steel gets produced in India under lower environmental standards and then shipped back to us. Globally, by closing those steel plants, the amount of CO2 put into the air has gone up. All we've done is to export the emissions. Similarly, with coal, there's an anthracite mine, up in Cumbria that could be open. We're not going to open it. We are overtaxing the North Sea. The Tories have done this, not Labour. Chevron, after 60 years, have left. So we will be using, even those who are most worried about this, will tell you we'll be using oil and gas in 2050. But my argument is that we should...
Your argument is David Attenborough's wrong and the King is wrong. We're clear about that.
No, the King is wrong to say CO2 is a pollutant. That is wrong, clearly.
We have to move on,
and
Mr Farage.
If we go for nuclear energy, and, you and I both know, Rolls-Royce are making amazing strides with small modular reactors, we will then have electricity production that produces zero carbon.
Understood. We have to move on. Time is short. Now,
what a pity.
And what you say when you've had them is you had problems with your vetting system. We understand. We don't need to repeat that. And you say other parties have had them as well.
Well, the others have got betting scandals.
Yes,
the others in the last Parliament were exposed as perverts, weirdos. Yeah. I mean, goodness me.
Let's not. You've had candidates calling immigrants a plague. You've had candidates who say Muslims should be removed from the UK.
Really?
You've had a candidate that claims that Africans have a low IQ. Why do you think that people with really extreme and unpleasant views rally to your cause?
We've also had an awful lot of candidates being stitched up in the most extraordinary way with quotes taken out of context. Look, let's be honest.
Why do they rally to your cause?
Because I think the truth of it is, before I got involved, reform was virtual in the sense that it had no party. There's no national party structure.
I'm asking you a slightly different question. I'm asking about you. They think, don't they, that you agree with them?
They're not there because of me.
They think you agree.
No.
You founded the party, you're the president of the party, you're the owner of the party.
I have had no involvement with the day-to-day running of the party for over 3 years. Yeah. These candidates were recruited before I said
Nigel's our guy.
Cobblers. Absolute cobblers. I talk about things that are worthy of debate. I often get shouted down and abused by the political class or media class. And then you know what happens, Nick? 2 or 3 years later, the things that I've said become mainstream debate. And I've always been absolutely clear about this. And you look at, take the Brexit Party, for example, that won the European elections back in 2019. We were, not with any positive discrimination, the most diverse group in that European Parliament. This is what I believe. I believe regardless of race or religion or sexual preference, that everybody should be treated equally. I don't believe in group rights. I don't believe in dividing us up. And I think, you know, Martin Luther King said in that famous speech, I want my kids to be judged not by the colour of their skin.
Sure.
I believe in meritocracy.
Yeah, you said you admired Enoch Powell and you criticised the first non-white British Prime Minister for not understanding our culture. That's why people think...
Well, he doesn't understand our culture.
Yeah, but
otherwise, he would have stayed at D-Day to honour the remaining remnants of that generation.
You said it about a non-white politician. Let me just finish this interview by asking...
He's too upper class. He's too detached. Sure. He couldn't go down the pub and meet ordinary people. You know that, and I know that.
Lorenzo, the truth of it is, this ought to be the immigration election. Because whether we talk about housing, whether we talk about the fact that rents are up between 20 and 30% in most of the country in the last 4 years, whether we talk about the roads, whether we talk about infrastructure, we are living through a population crisis, an increase of 10 million people since Mr. Blair came to power, and frankly, it's making us poorer, it is diminishing our quality of life, and it's nothing to do with race or any of those issues. It's to do with actually putting the interests of our communities first.
She's answered. Penny Mordaunt, thank you very much.
I don't think she has, folks.
OK,
I don't think she has.
Thank you. Nigel Farage.
My question is to Penny Mordaunt. Given that your 2010 manifesto, your 2015 manifesto, your 2017 manifesto said you'd reduce net migration to tens of thousands, your 2019 manifesto said immigration would massively reduce, and that net 4.3 million people have come into the country since that time, why on earth should anybody believe the fifth manifesto that promises cuts to net migration?
Because of the record of this Prime Minister. So we've had...
That's fine, I'm happy.
Figures out today that show that visa applications have fallen by 30%, and the OBR's own forecasts say that we will halve immigration by next summer. That's the trajectory we are on, and we will give Parliament the chance to set an annual cap on family and work visas. That will be enshrined a legal cap, and that is what we are offering. That's why you can have confidence that those numbers have come down. They're projected to come down. And the only alternative you have in this election is that, or what the Labour Party have on offer. Nigel is a Labour enabler.
Nigel,
and he is enabling no cap, no target and no plan.
Penny, let Nigel Farage come back.
I don't believe a single word that you say. You've deceived us with the last four manifestos. I don't believe you in the fifth. And as for being a Labour enabler, we are now ahead of you in the national polls.
OK, thank you.
A vote for you is actually now a vote for Labour.
Thank you very much, all of you, for the questions so far. That's it for this point. That's it for
Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed.
Serious. This is the only two.
Thank you very much indeed for all of your questions.
With us and a cap on immigration.
Thank you very much, Farage.
Unlike the rest, I don't need a script. I've come out of retirement, back into politics, with passion in my heart. And I'll tell you, Britain is broken, everyone knows it, and Britain needs reform. The election is over under our system. We know that Keir Starmer's going to win and probably have quite a big majority. The question is, who will lead the opposition? Because for democracy to work, there has to be a voice of opposition. And I put it to you that Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats won't do that, because he actually agrees with Labour on most things. Rishi Sunak won't do it. Well, he'll probably be in California by then anyway. And the Tory party is split down the middle and about to implode in this election. I say to you, I will stand up against open borders. I will stand up and say those that come illegally across the channel should be deported. I will stand up and fight for the millions of men and women running small businesses. I have the courage to take on the mob. Please join the revolt.
Thank you.